All right, so let's run through how to set up an Azure Logic app. So to cover creating an Azure Logic app, I'm going to run through and create one for a Trello board. As an example, we have a Trello board here, and this is actually what we use at TechSnips to manage our snips, for example. So here we have first, second, third lists, and what we want to do is we want to run an Azure Logic app when a card is added to the first list. So in Azure, the first thing we're going to do is to create a Logic app. So we'll hit create, search for Logic app, click on create, and then we're going to give it a name and select the location, if different from the default. But since my resource group is in West US 2, I'll leave that there. And then we'll go ahead and click on create. And it typically is created pretty quickly, so we can go ahead and click on go to resource to go straight to the new Azure Logic app. There we go. And we'll first load into this launch page, I guess we can call it. We're just going to go ahead and click on blank Logic app down here, since I already know what we want to do. So in the blank Logic app, you're going to see it loads the Logic app designer. And here is where we can actually select the trigger that we'd like to use. And you can see that in preparing for this demo, I searched for Trello previously, so it's here in the list. So we click on Trello. It'll actually load up all the triggers for Trello. In this case, there are 4 of them. So we're going to select the when a new card is added to a list. If you are comfortable doing preview actions, we can go and try that out. And the first thing it'll ask you to do if you haven't used the Trello connector in Azure Logic Apps is to sign in. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So the sign in page loads. You want to give it access to your account, and it will tell you everything you need to know about what the kind of access. So I'm going to go ahead and click on allow. And this is a really cool part about Azure Logic Apps is that's all you have to do. So then you want to grab the board that you want. In this case, our board was called TechSnips Demo. And then you're going to grab the list ID that you want. And in this case, we're going to say when a new card is added to the first list. And so let's say that for the sake of a demo here, all we care to do is if the card is added to the first list, we want to move it to the second list. And that's it. So what we can click on is a new step here. And since we want to move the card in Trello, this is going to be another Trello action. So we're going to select Trello here. And the actions show up. And this is where we can scroll through and look at all the different actions that we want to do. And in this case, we're looking for update a card. So you can see there, it shows up here. So if we click on update a card, it now will load the action here in the designer. And the board ID, this is going to be the same board as before. I'm going to select TechSnips Demo. And the card ID, so this is where we can actually look at, if we click on enter custom value, that will let us look at the dynamic values. And these dynamic values, this will tell you where these values come from. So you can see here, when a new card is added to a list, v3. And if we scroll up, we can see that is the name of this first trigger. And so that is, these are all of the items that come out of this first trigger. And since we're looking for the card ID, if we click on card ID, that will now be populated with the ID of the card that is passed via the trigger. And the name, for some reason, this always asks for the name of the card. And so we could just grab the card name as well. And then you notice we don't have any other parameters here. And this is why this is a good example, because if we need to add a new parameter, we hit the drop down for new parameters. And in this case, we want to select the list ID. And then what we can do is we'll check the box and then just click out of it and add it here. And this is where you can occasionally run into some issues, like this example here, required parameters ID board not set or invalid. And I'm guessing it's some sort of issue with the Trello connector itself. And we want to get the ID of the list. So what we can do is we can first list out all the lists on the board by adding an action before this card. And we're going to select Trello. So we're going to scroll down and we're looking for the get a list by ID action. Get list by ID, here it is. And this is where we can actually select the board again. And then we can select the list ID. And in this case, we want to move it to the second list. So we'll click on second list. And what this will do is return the ID of the list so that now when we go back to update a card, we can click into here for the list ID, we still get that error, but we can enter custom value. And we now have the get list by ID option, and we can see the list ID, which is the unique ID of the list. And now we have all those properties filled. So I'm going to go ahead and click on save. And saves are pretty quick. So what we can do is flip on over to our Trello board and try creating a card in that list. So the from list, we're going to add a card. If we hit enter here, you'll notice it moves very quickly. And this is because the Azure Logic App trigger actually creates a webhook. So as soon as you create it, Trello kicks off that webhook, tells the Logic App that something happened, and it does all the things you asked it to. So that's how you can create an Azure Logic App to talk to Trello. Thank you for watching.